As the Germans rampaged through different lands and took different territory, they conducted huge-scale killings and massacres in different places. Following the Wehrmacht were the Einsatzgruppen, the death squads of the SS, whose purpose it was to solely massacre civilians and those deemed by the Nazis as undesirable. There were hundreds of atrocities carried out under the cover of the Second World War, and still today many of them remain untold and lie under the soil in Europe. One series of mass executions carried out on the west coast of Latvia following the German occupation of the country was the Liepaja massacres. Around 5,000 Jews, Roma, communists and others were killed, and the largest site of killing took place surrounding the town of Skeed on the dunes and the beaches there. Join us today as we look at the horrific executions of Skeed Beach. Remember to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. On hot and warm summer days, local families from the popular and busy port city of Liepaja would flock to nearby beaches to enjoy Latvia's west coast and a day by the sea. They would relax on the sandy seashore and swim in the sea there as anyone would do by the coast. Families would sunbathe, build sandcastles and would get involved in different activities such as kayaking in the Baltic Sea. Skeed Beach was one popular place for this, but during the Second World War, the beautiful beach would become a site of great horror for many of those people who had fond memories there before the conflict of visiting the coast. The area of Liepaja was seen as an important part of Latvia by the Germans who targeted it. It was where a naval base could be found and also an international port, and for the Germans and Hitler it was seen as an important place to take control of. The people living in the area were more likely communists too, which made Hitler more determined to capture it. It was planned that it would be taken early following Hitler's wishes to take the Baltic states, and the attack on the area was spearheaded by the German 291st Infantry Division. The Red Army and other Soviet resistors fought bravely and managed to prevent the Germans entering the city, but over time they were forced back by the Germans, who entered Liepaja on the 29th of June 1941. Over the next few days, sniper fire and fighting rose up in the city, and there was much damage caused by bombing raids and fires. But as soon as the Germans invaded the area, they began to enact their brutal policies of the Holocaust in Latvia, where German soldiers would massacre civilians. The first killings began with 6 Jews being shot in a town near Liepaja, inside of a graveyard, but after the fall of the city, the Germans sought after Jews and began to hunt them down and massacre them. It's believed that almost 6,000 Jews fell into German hands, and over the first few days of occupation, German soldiers were randomly shooting Jews. Around 100 were killed in the sporadic early shootings, and many were massacred amongst civilian populations inside of bomb craters, and Latvians were encouraged to hand over Jews to the SS. The town became a site of execution, with shootings taking place on the streets, and the city hospital was raided by the Germans, with many Jewish patients being torn from their beds and then shot alongside Jewish staff and doctors. They also shot children, and more were massacred in the town and surrounding areas. The Einsatzgruppen entered the town and took advantage of the defensive fortifications dug by the Soviet soldiers who tried to defend the city. In Rhinus Park, in the centre of the city, the Red Army had dug a huge trench to defend from, and in this Jews were rounded up and were marched to the park and then forced in the trenches. They were then shot dead by the Einsatzgruppen and the SD, and in one particular massacre, it's believed that between 300 and 1,400 were killed in the park killings. But Liepaja was placed under the command of the Kriegsmarine because of its port, and then further brutal laws were placed upon the town. The commander of it, Stein, said that for every act of sabotage against the occupying forces, 10 civilians would be shot. They also forced all Jews to wear yellow stars on their clothes, introduced shopping hours for Jews and curfews, barred Jews from public transport, and placed further restrictions on them. As the weeks went on and the Latvians lived under occupation, more shootings and executions in Liepaja were carried out. Jews and communists were arrested and then tortured, and the women's prison became so full that women could not lie down at night because of the overcrowding. More massacres continued in July 1941, and hundreds were being shot in ditches around the city. Executions, it was said, happened on a large scale every few weeks. Many of these took place around the beach area, to the south of the lighthouse, where execution squads would execute Jews and communists. But following a transfer of power within the SS in the area, the execution rate went up significantly, and executions were happening on a large scale twice a week. Different groups of Jews were being brought out and then massacred. On the 22nd of July 1941, Dr. Hans Kavelmacher, who had been placed in charge of the Navy's command in Liepaja, asked the SS High Command for more SS men and more Nazi police to introduce a quick solution to the Jewish problem in the region. He wanted the city's Jews to be massacred quickly, and with this more killing took place, with the Araj Command brought in to conduct further murders. It was noted near the beach, close to the naval base, that the Jews were crouching down on the ground. They had to walk in groups of around 10 to the edge of a pit. Here they were shot by Latvian civilians. The execution area was visited by scores of German spectators from the Navy and the Reichsbahn, the National Railway. I turned to Kugler and said in no uncertain terms that it was intolerable that the shootings were being carried out in front of spectators. Throughout August 1941, further killings continued, but they built up to the big action that occurred between December the 15th and December the 17th. The largest of the Liepaja massacres took place on 3 freezing cold winter days. The Latvian police began to arrest Jews and transport them to the women's prison, where they were locked inside of a courtyard. Further Jews were gathered up and then were taken from their homes, and it was said that 4,000 of Liepaja's Jews were collected in a group. The site of the execution was Skeed Beach, which was a nearby fishing village. The execution site was north of the city, and the beach was used as a holding point for the victims before they were then executed. Inside of the dunes of the beach, a trench had been dug that ran parallel to the shore. This huge trench was 100 metres long and 3 metres wide, and Jews were ordered to march from the women's prison to the killing site. Once they arrived at Skeed Beach, they were put into a barn and were then collected in groups of 20 at a time, where they were forced into the trench on the sand at gunpoint. They were forced to strip completely as they got closer to the pit, and then the victims would have peered into the trench, seeing hundreds of bodies. They were then driven into the pit and were shot by firing squads who stood on the edge. The place which for so many, a beach overlooking the Baltic Sea, became a site of horror where over 4,000 were slaughtered. Facing the Baltic Sea, the water would be their final sight, before German and Latvian execution squads shot straight through them. There were 3 units conducting the shooting, 1 German, 1 made up of Latvian SD men, and another of Latvian police. After the initial volley of shots was fired towards the victims, a German SD man would climb into the trench and inspect the bodies of the 20 killed. If anyone was still alive, he would fire a pistol into their bodies. It was hoped by the executioners that the bodies would fall deeper into the trench following the shots, but they even employed a kicker whose job it was to shove, kick and roll the bodies into the grave. Some of the executioners were even given alcohol to make their jobs seemingly easier for them, and on these cold winter days, thousands were killed on Skeed Beach. It was said of the site of execution, "The following day I went with several members of our unit to the execution area on horseback. When we arrived at the sand hills, we could see the arms and legs of the executed Jews sticking out of the inadequately filled graves. After seeing this, we officers sent a written communication to our headquarters in Liepaja. As a result of our communication, the dead Jews were covered properly with sand. Talk of executions spread across the country, and it was said that regret about the fate of the Jews is constantly expressed. There are few voices to be heard which are in favour of the elimination of the Jews. Among other things, a rumour abroad is that executions were filmed in order to provide material to use against the Latvian Schutzmannschaft. This material is said to prove that Latvians and not Germans carried out the executions." One of the sickest parts of the executions on the beach was that they were photographed by Richard Weiner, a man who was enlisted to document the Einsatzgruppen's killings. It was said that over the course of the months following the executions on Skeed Beach, the executioners repeatedly went back to the beach and extended the trench until it became over 1 kilometre long. In 1943 they went back to the beach and put chlorine over the bodies in an attempt to hide their crimes. The shootings on Skeed Beach were the largest of the executions of Liepaja's Jews and inhabitants. On the sand dunes, it was said that up to 4,000 were killed, mostly women and children. The horrific story of the slaughter on the sand is tragically just one massacre that was carried out by the Nazi death squads that followed the Wehrmacht's advances. The beach, which so many would have enjoyed before the start of the Second World War, became a huge site of mass murder, and the sand will forever remain tainted by the slaughter that occurred there. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.